Hi there, and welcome to this second in a series of videos where we're exploring the history and the ideology of the idea that we call
Common sense. It's all about common sense.
Common sense.
Common sense.
Common sense!
The common sense.
Common sense.
Common sense.
Common sense.
Common sense.
In the first video, we took a whistle-stop tour of some of the early ideas of common sense. We looked at Aristotle through Aquinas to Descartes. But in this video, I want to slow down and I want to take a deep dive into one really remarkable paragraph from Descartes' Discourse on Method. And the reason that I want to do that is that I think it sets up three crucial paradoxes that flow all the way through the subsequent history of common sense. And this paragraph, it shows us the strange, double-edged nature of common sense. How common sense can be both unifying and divisive, egalitarian and exclusive, elitist and populist. How it can be a force for the status quo and at the same time a force for revolution. And this paragraph also hints at how common sense later became politicized, weaponized, really, and how it's turned into a new source of authority in contemporary culture. Now, Descartes, no doubt, would have been astounded and bewildered by the points that I'm going to make from this paragraph. These ideas are here in this passage in seed form, not fully formed yet. But nevertheless, the more I've looked at it, the more I've become convinced that this is a crucial paragraph, and it lays the foundations for much of what was to come later. By the end of this video, I hope that we'll see something that looks much more like the idea of common sense that we've got today. And I hope we'll understand just a little bit better the great power and promise and peril of this most fascinating and slippery of terms. But before we get into the paragraph itself, I just want to take a step back. I want to think about why Descartes even appeals to le bon sens in the first place. His aim in the Discourse on Method, as every philosophy undergraduate is taught, and as I was taught as an undergraduate, his aim in this text is to establish knowledge on a certain footing. Because he was thinking in the teeth of a wave of Pyrrhonian philosophical skepticism, catalyzed by the essays of Michel de Montaigne, that was rife at the time when he was writing. This was a skepticism that cast doubt on the reliability of sensory perception, the veracity of human reasoning, and the foundations of scientific inquiry. And Descartes' method, built on this idea of le bon sens, is his way of refuting that skepticism. And this itself is a crucial pattern that we'll see played out again and again in the history of common sense. Because later, in very different contexts to Descartes, we'll see that common sense is often used as a way of coping with epistemic uncertainty or with epistemic complexity. In other words, people reach for common sense when they're faced with a highly complex or unmanageable situation, or when they're faced with powerful arguments that they can't refute any other way. And it's also important to note that Descartes doesn't just think that le bon sens gives him a hunch about what might be true or an intuition of what's likely to be correct. He claims absolute irrefutable certainty for his method. And the model he bases his refutation on is the model of geometry, which he says in the Discourse is the only discipline to have certain and evident reasons. So for Descartes, le bon sens gives us a way of discovering truth that's just as evident and just as certain as the rules of geometry. It's a way of finding somewhere solid and firm to stand when the ground is moving and falling away under your feet, when there's skepticism all around. And this, once more, sets a pattern for future uses of the idea of common sense, because it's more often than not presented not as a hunch, but as an irrefutable and certain guide to knowledge and morals. Now, I want to begin where I left off in the last video, with Descartes' idea of common sense as a rational faculty, because it brings us to three great paradoxes, really, that structure and problematize the idea of common sense. Between the local and the universal, in other words, is common sense something that everybody has, or that only a few people have? A tension or a paradox between the natural and the artificial. Is common sense something that we're born with, or something that we have to cultivate and make ourselves? And thirdly, there's the paradox of expertise. Is common sense something you need to learn, a method you need to develop? Or is it something that you learn to practice by getting rid of expertise and learning? So let's turn now to this really quite remarkable paragraph. It's the first paragraph of part one of Descartes' Discourse on Method. Let me read the entire paragraph, and then we'll look at it carefully together. Let's hear the French first, and then I'll read the English.
Le bon sens est la chose du monde la mieux partagée. Car chacun pense en être si bien pourvu que ceux mêmes qui sont les plus difficiles à contenter en toute autre chose n'ont point coutume d'en désirer plus qu'ils en ont. En quoi, il n'est pas vraisemblable que tous se trompent, mais plutôt cela témoigne que la puissance de bien juger et distinguer le vrai d'avec le faux, qui est proprement ce qu'on nomme le bon sens ou la raison, est naturellement égale en tous les hommes. Et ainsi que la diversité de nos opinions ne vient pas de ce que les uns sont plus raisonnables que les autres, mais seulement de ce que nous conduisons nos pensées par diverses voies et ne considérons pas les mêmes choses. Car ce n'est pas assez d'avoir l'esprit bon, mais le principal est de l'appliquer bien. Les plus grandes âmes sont capables des plus grands vices, aussi bien que des plus grandes vertus. Et ceux qui ne marchent que fort lentement peuvent avancer beaucoup davantage s'ils suivent toujours le droit chemin, que ne font ceux qui courent et qui s'en éloignent.
Good sense is, of all things among men, the most equally distributed. For everyone thinks himself so abundantly provided with it that those even who are the most difficult to satisfy in everything else do not usually desire a larger measure of this quality than they already possess. And in this, it is not likely that they are all mistaken. The conviction is rather to be held as testifying that the power of judging aright and distinguishing truth from error, which is properly what is called good sense or reason, is by nature equal in all men, and that the diversity of our opinions, consequently, does not arise from some being endowed with a larger share of reason than others, but solely from this, that we conduct our thoughts along different ways, do not fix our attention on the same objects. For to be possessed of a vigorous mind is not enough. The prime requisite is rightly to apply it. The greatest minds, as they are capable of the highest excellences, are open, likewise, to the greatest aberrations. And those who travel very slowly may yet make far greater progress, provided they keep always to the straight road, than those who, while they run, forsake it. The first paradox that I want to draw our attention to in this paragraph is the paradox of the local and the universal. Now, the first sentence of this paragraph is familiar from the last video. Common sense, or le bon sens, is the most widely distributed thing in the world. Everyone thinks they have enough of it. No one thinks they need any more. Now, is this because we're all poor judges of ourselves? We all overestimate our own powers of reason? The skeptic might conclude something like that. Descartes doesn't think so. No, he doesn't go down that cynical road. In the second sentence, he's quite willing to concede that we're not mistaken when we all judge ourselves to be well endowed with good sense. We all possess an innate capacity to judge rightly and to distinguish truth from error. So, le bon sens is universal, right? Well, yes and no, really, because although we all possess it, we don't all think alike, clearly. So where does that difference come from? It comes, Descartes argues, from the fact that we, quote, conduct our thought along different ways. The French is nous conduisons nos pensées par diverses voies. And this idea of voie, une voie, is a path or a lane or a track. And this metaphor of the path is crucial for Descartes. This is what he means by method, as in the Discourse on method. Now, the term method comes from the ancient Greek methodos, which combines meta, meaning after or beyond, and hodos, meaning a way or a path. So methodos, which translates as pursuit or following after, is the path that you follow to get something done. So to stretch Descartes' metaphor probably beyond breaking point, the problem isn't with our method of locomotion. We've all got the legs to take us where we want to go, to get us to the truth. The problem is that some people follow the right path to get there, and others don't. So, as Descartes puts it, quote, to be possessed of a vigorous mind is not enough. The prime requisite is rightly to apply it. Now, this sentence is quite clunky in English, but it's really elegant in French. So do please allow me just to read the French out with its little internal alliteration. Car ce n'est pas assez d'avoir l'esprit bon, mais le principal est de l'appliquer bien. This distinction between having good sense and using it correctly, or between having the legs to get you where you're going and choosing the right path to follow, I think is philosophically brilliant. And, as we're going to see in later videos, politically really consequential as well. Because it gives you two things. First, it gives you a supposedly universal baseline that everybody is supposed to possess. No one has any excuse that they simply don't have bon sens. But secondly, it gives you a way of dividing between people who follow the good sense that they have and those who don't. In other words, of creating an in-group of those who pursue the right method and an out-group of those who don't. In other words, it makes a choice not to follow common sense, not simply one option among others, but a failure. If I don't act according to reason, then I can't claim that I'm just not made that way, or that reason doesn't apply to me, or that it's not to my taste. From Descartes' point of view, if I don't follow his method, I'm denying something that is fundamental to me. I'm acting in violation of my own faculties. I'm violating the good sense that is always already in me. And this makes common sense into what we might think of as a local universal. And this is a key idea in the ideological history of common sense. So on the one hand, le bon sens is local because not everybody in society follows it. It characterizes one particular group. But it's universal because of the claim that everybody has it. So our way of doing things, if we are following Descartes' method, is not just one option among many, but it is the authentic, honest, right way for everyone. As the full title of the discourse has it, it's the méthode pour bien conduire sa raison et chercher la vérité dans les sciences. The discourse of method of rightly conducting the reason and seeking truth in the sciences. Not one option for conducting the reason, the right way to do this. So this is the only right way to go about things. And those who don't follow it are not just taking a different path, but they're either epistemologically or morally to blame, or perhaps even both. And this local universal is going to be a characteristic feature of appeals to common sense, right down to our own day. In fact, we can see it in the posters about common sense that you can buy online. Many of them use common sense to create in-groups and out-groups, to condemn those who don't exercise common sense. And as if they're following the script, just like Descartes says, no one thinks that they are the ones who lack common sense. All of these posters really are neat summaries of ideas coming from the first paragraph of Descartes' Discourse. Now let's move to the second paradox in this passage. The paradox according to which common sense is a natural artificiality. It's natural because it's innate. Everyone has it. You don't need an education, you don't need breeding to acquire it. It is, as Descartes says, the most equally distributed thing among all people. It's part of who you are, it's part of who everyone is. And this is crucial for the ideology of common sense, because it means that if you don't act in accordance with this natural faculty, it's not just that you've made a different choice, it's that you're being insincere. You're in bad faith. In fact, you're in denial of who you are. And therefore, if you reject common sense, it's not just that you've made a bad choice, it's that you are condemnable. You are culpable. You're a walking contradiction. You're denying your true self. You're living a lie. And this sort of thinking will be at the base of accusations in later centuries that those who don't follow common sense are not just mistaken, but morally corrupt, or at least morally suspect. But as well as being innate and natural, common sense is also artificial, in the sense that it must be intentionally cultivated by following Descartes' method. A good use of common sense is not something that's found, it's something that's made. If Descartes' common sense were a landscape, it wouldn't be a sprawling English coppice, but a precise, a geometric French garden, like the garden at Versailles. The method is not something that you fall into naturally. It's something that you have to work hard to follow. As Descartes says in this passage, you have to travel slowly, keeping always to the straight road. It takes focus. It takes deliberate intention. And this natural artificiality runs through the modern discourse of common sense. Do things our way, follow our method, And you will find that you're really following no method at all, but just doing things the natural way, the intuitive way, common sense way. This claim to naturalness is very powerful because if something is natural, it's not part of the political game. It's not the possession of one political party or one social group. And this, too, we see today, don't we? Appeals to common sense are often an attempt to transcend party politics, at the same time as they often advance a particular political agenda. It's politics under the guise of not being political, of speaking for everyone, not just one party. But as we'll see in later videos, just like Descartes, each politician has their own method for following the path of common sense. Descartes' position is very open about requiring such a method, but more recent instances try to hide their method under a cloak of intuition or gut feelings. Common sense in modern politics is the method that tries to pretend it isn't a method. The method, if you like, that dare not speak its name. Well, so far in this passage, we've seen that common sense is a local universality and a natural artificiality. But there's one final paradox here, and it's a crucial one, I think. Look at that final sentence again. The greatest minds, as they are capable of the highest excellences, are open likewise to the greatest aberrations. And those who travel very slowly may yet make far greater progress, provided they keep always to the straight road, than those who, while they run, forsake it. I think there's a deep paradox in this sentence. Let's call it the paradox of expertise. It's got two parts. First, great learning or great expertise are actually an impediment to common sense. Being learned or educated are no guarantee of common sense. In fact, they may well make it harder to follow the path of common sense. And here we hear the faint fore-echoes of anti-elitism and populism that will grow over the course of the 18th century. But just because learning might get in the way of common sense, that doesn't mean we should abandon all learning or all expertise. To the contrary, we need to employ Descartes' learning, Descartes' expertise, the very slow and straight progress of Descartes' method, if we're to follow the path of common sense as he sets it out. So the paradox here is that Descartes' learning and expertise is posing as an antidote to learning and expertise. Everyone else has prejudices and aberrations. I just advance slowly and carefully. So in this passage, we hear a faint fore-echo again, and it is only a faint fore-echo here, that as the 18th century progresses becomes clearer and clearer and clearer. That common sense does not attack expertise and learning per se, but it strategically critiques particular forms of expertise and particular types of learning, replacing them with equally elitist forms of expertise that present themselves as being anti-expertise. So the denial of all expertise and a seemingly egalitarian moment always risks revealing itself to be just the replacement of one hierarchy with an alternative hierarchy. So as this video draws to a close, let's take a step back. In this one paragraph, we've seen three paradoxes of common sense, each one of which is only gently hinted at here, but more and more pronounced in the subsequent history of common sense. We've got a local, that presents itself as a universal. We've got something that's artificial, presenting itself as something natural. And we've got a very particular form of expertise, presenting itself as the refusal, the denial of expertise. And we're beginning to see in these three paradoxes that common sense is an irreducibly complex notion in tension with itself. So the next time you hear a politician or a political commentator protest that something is just common sense, do remember these tools to analyze that claim. Where is the claim to universality hiding something very local or particular? Where is the claim to being natural or intuitive, hiding something artificial? And where is the claim to reject or even despise expertise, hiding just a different form of expertise? I'll see you next time.